you just went on your dream job interview, or was it for your dream job or your nightmare job? How can you even tell these days? So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the 7 red flags in a job interview. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to tell you what to do if you know that there's enough red flags that you just can't continue without having to sit through and suffer the rest of that job interview. If that sounds good to you, tap that like button and let's jump straight in. The first red flag is that they're not trying to sell you on the opportunity. You know those companies that are just like, oh, you would be so lucky if we offered you a job to work with us. And you just know that they're not really gonna pay you or appreciate you or give you any career growth opportunities once you get in. That's who we're trying to avoid here. The most important thing to keep in mind in a job interview is that it's bi-directional. It's going both ways, my friends. So as much as they are learning about you, asking you questions and trying to understand your experience because they're gauging against the role that they have open, you should be interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. You're trying to figure out if this is the next right step in your career. You want to make sure that you're landing in a job that you are valued, that is fulfilling, and is helping you achieve your professional goals. And you can't assess any of that if they don't let you ask any questions. Now, if you haven't been asking questions in a job interview, you absolutely need to. I actually have a video with a few suggested questions that you can ask. I will leave that in the description down below so that you can check it out after this one. To amplify this red flag, there's a new extreme that some toxic companies might actually go to. And not only do they think that you should just be so gracious for the potential opportunity to work for them, they actually take the opportunity in the interview to undermine and undervalue the experience and the value that you bring to the organization. And really, this is so shady when it happens. And I've seen this happen more than once, unfortunately. For example, you tell them about absolutely crushing one of your KPIs, and the hiring manager or interviewer says, well, that's not really a big deal. That's just a normal day around here. If they're trying to sell you that your most exceptional accomplishments are just really, really average, then it begs the question, why would they even offer you a job in the first place? And these people are going to offer you a job. The reason why they're doing that is because they don't want you to feel really secure, so that maybe you take a lowball job offer and maybe you'll just be so insecure that you'll stay in the role for a while. Especially in today's job market with a labor shortage and the fact that there is more opportunities open than there are qualified people to fill them, any company that you are interviewing with absolutely needs to be selling you on this being the opportunity for you. However, there is a flip side to this that you need to watch out for, and that brings us into our second red flag in a job interview, and that, my friends, is love bombing. Have you heard of love bombing before? Just in case you haven't, here's a real quick introduction to the concept. Often used by narcissists, it is the practice of fawning and cooing and praising and building someone up just so that you can later tear them down. What would this look like in a job interview? Well, perhaps the hiring manager is really gloating about your accomplishments and what a big deal you are in this industry and how absurdly lucky they are that you're even considering the opportunity of working for such a lowly organization such as this one. Okay, maybe not that far, but you get the picture. And I just said that they should be hyping you up and selling you the opportunity, and that is absolutely true, but it needs to be within reason. For example, if they are really bringing this to new levels, like this is the biggest deal that you agreed to interview with us, and unless you're an industry expert, like I'm talking levels of you have books, you're published in journals, you are legitimately the go-to expert in your industry, this could be a signal that they are setting you up to later tear you down. They know it's necessary in order for you to take the job and to keep you in the job for just a little bit. But this dynamic, I promise you, does reverse. And one day that compliment train is going to turn and they will start to tear you down. Now, I'm actually really curious if any of you have experienced love bombing in a job interview. Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, let's get into the next red flag. And this one is gonna need some context because the next red flag is they don't have their ish together. Now, honestly, I kind of feel like a jerk saying this one because I know a lot of companies are hiring for a lot of roles and recruiters are really stretched thin. However, if through the interview process, there's a lot of miscommunications and snafus, like they didn't send you the interview link, or they didn't tell you who you were going to be in touch with or how to get in touch with them, or maybe they mess up on the day and time and you show up and no one's there, or you're told it's like supposed to be the next day, or even worse, it was the day before. This is something that you need to watch out for. Now, of course, it goes beyond the recruitment team. It goes right into the hiring team, my friends. Another way that this red flag might show up in a job interview to alert you that this might not be your dream employer is that they have really unreasonable expectations about the role, about what you'll be doing, or they're just totally unclear about what the job actually is. Like, how are you supposed to take a job if they don't even know what it is? This is one I just don't follow. I also feel like this is common in the startup industry and really in any small business where hiring managers aren't necessarily used to hiring and they don't really know what they're doing in terms of team growth. But wow, have I heard the full gamut of stories in this regard. I've heard of people that in the interview uncovered that they were really hiring for like a senior leader level position, but they were hiring an entry role because they didn't have budget. They just expected the person to get paid for the entry level role while they did the senior level role. Or if you start asking about things like key performance indicators in the role and they just have no idea how they're going to measure success, how are they going to know you're successful in the role? And how are you going to know that you're successful in the role? And what if they say one thing, but it's not quantified and they end up moving the goalpost or just interpreting things strangely? You have no idea. So this can be a really big red flag. Again, it's one that I know can be common in certain types of companies, but it still doesn't make it not a red flag. It's still a red flag in my book. Now, honestly, the funniest way that this shows up is when their expectations are just completely out of whack. In fact, I'll tell you guys a quick story about one interview that I went to early in my career for a New York City startup. I was in the final stages of interviews, and at this point, I already knew I wasn't accepting the job. I just didn't know that I could walk out of a job interview at that time because there was already so many red flags, and I'm gonna come back to some of those in just a minute. But in the interview, I was sitting with a senior executive at the company, and all he did for the entire time in the meeting was not ask me any questions. It was just tell me that if he decided to offer me a job that I just needed to be really thankful and I needed to commit at least my next 5 years in order for him to get ROI. Bear in mind, the job that they were hiring for was also seriously undertitled and, let's be clear, probably underpaid. Now, 5 years at a company might not seem wild to some of you, but if you're in a tech startup, that's like your entire career. Okay, maybe not your entire career, but it's a really long time. So if you're talking to the interviewer and they're communicating any kind of lack of clarity or crazy expectations about your job, what you're going to be able to accomplish, or really what you're expected to give the company, see that for the red flag that it is. And actually, on that cringy note, I need to go into the next job interview red flag because this one, it's a doozy. And unless you've been through it, you're gonna be like, no one does this, but I promise you this happens. The fourth job interview red flag is inappropriate conduct or questions from your interviewer. And yes, this still happens in 2021. Now, first of all, there are things that your job interviewer cannot ask. Now, that list, that criteria might be different in different places because I know you guys are kind of watching from all over the globe. But for example, one question that in the US, employers cannot ask you your age. It is an illegal question, not allowed to ask you your age or things that are going to infer your age. However, I know that if you're in Europe, you probably have your date of birth on your CV. It's really obvious there. So do keep in mind these considerations. Now, other questions that are at best inappropriate and probably illegal include questions about things like your salary history if you are in a state or location where that is prohibited by law, questions about your family planning, which is actual questions that I know a lot of women hear. So really, when they're getting all personal up in your business, maybe it's inappropriate, but it's maybe illegal. And because I can't give you a full list of questions that you cannot be asked in an interview because there's so many of you in so many different places, A quick tip for you to make sure that you know what they are. What you can do is you can hop over to Google and you can just pop into the search bar illegal questions in a job interview followed by your location, so your state or your country, whichever level that the laws are at. And that actually should yield some hits for you to get a solid idea about questions that you should not be asked through the course of a job interview. Now, maybe some of these questions aren't illegal, but they're extremely inappropriate. So going back to work-life boundaries, which you all know I love talking about at this point, the mere fact that they're asking questions that are so far beyond the work-life boundaries is a major red flag. After all, you are going to be working with your interviewer. Either they're the recruiter, someone who's going to be on your team, or your future manager. And if they just have zero boundaries and that is the culture and it is acceptable enough to be asked in a job interview, you have to interpret that as a red flag. So for example, another interview that I was on, because apparently I have the worst job interviewers ever, noticed my wedding ring and asked me why I still continue to work when I was married. Not an appropriate question. Now, of course, the inappropriateness doesn't always limit itself to questions. No, that wouldn't be fun. Sometimes this might come up with remarks or commentary from your interviewer, which is very uncomfortable. So for example, if your interviewer says something along the lines of, well, this is convenient, we needed more women on the team, that would be a job interview red flag, my friend. And of course, there's also just people who have no common sense and make racist, homophobic, misogynist, xenophobic, all of the discriminatory comments, like literally in a job interview. Now, this is really unfortunate when it happens, but the silver lining is they're showing you who you are before you actually sign an employment contract and have financial dependency. So if any of those kind of extreme things come up in the job interview, thank goodness they threw up that red flag so that you can just remove yourself, not only from the running, but you can also remove yourself from the job interview. And that actually brings us to our fifth job interview red flag. And that is to watch the way that people are interacting with each other. Now, I will say this is a lot easier if you are in an on-site interview. You're going to see how the person working at the front desk is. You're going to see how people interact with each other. You can low-key observe how people are interacting in the office as you're waiting for your interview to start. But pay close attention to how they interact with each other, how they speak to each other, how they talk about each other in a job interview. This is actually giving you a really good insight into the work environment that it is, and can actually throw up a lot of red flags for a toxic work environment. If everyone's talking poorly about each other, if they're speaking inappropriately to each other, if they're just not conducting themselves professionally within the team, then you need to really question if that's a team that you want to be a part of. I mean, no judgment. Maybe that's your style. So maybe some conduct that I think is red flaggy isn't red flaggy for you. But what you're looking for here again is alignment with how you want to be at work and and your values versus what you're actually seeing and experiencing through the course of the job interview. And if those are not aligned for you, that is a red flag. But in general, you want to make sure that people are respectful, professional, and courteous with each other. That's just probably going to be a more positive work environment than if everyone is swearing and calling each other names, especially in a job interview, which is when they're actually trying to impress you so that you want to work for them, right? And the next red flag in a job interview is how they respond to your questions. And especially questions that you have about any concerns that you uncovered when you were preparing for the job interview. Now, in my next video, I'm going to dive in how to conduct research on a company in a little bit more detail. So if you're interested in that, do make sure that you're subscribed. But there's a lot of questions that you might ask about the company growth path, career opportunities, dodgy Glassdoor reviews that you uncovered in your preparation. Now, are they being a little bit dodgy when they answer? Do they get visibly frustrated when you ask them about those negative Glassdoor reviews? Do they give you ambivalent answers when you talk about career growth and career opportunities when you're actually at the company? Or if you ask why they like working there and they give you some random BS answer, you need to read that as the red flag that it is in the job interview. Now, again, this does depend on you asking questions and doing your research before you go into that job interview. And this is really important for your success in the job interview, for you to be able to appropriately find those red flags, and most importantly, to save yourself from landing in a toxic workplace. But there's another flag that we need to discuss, and this one is really, really important. And honestly, I think this is a job interview red flag that people will most quickly write off, but it's actually the most important one. The 7th red flag in a job interview is the vibe that you're picking up. So what is this vibe? Well, this is where it actually becomes really hard to put your finger on it. Does something just feel off in the conversation? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel unnecessarily uneasy? Are they making you uncomfortable in the job interview? Going back to my nightmare job interview, one thing that they did, part of the interview process was actually doing a presentation, and they decided to sabotage my presentation to see how I would react to test me. Now, not only was that in itself a job interview red flag that probably should have made the list, I just know that not everyone has those, but the vibe that they gave off as they were doing this, their comfort and willingness to sabotage someone in a job interview setting, which is inherently stressful, inherently has a lot of pressure, and let's face it, is not your normal situation. So it wasn't a direct world simulation to see how I would react. It was how I would react in a job interview. I just wasn't into working for someone who would test me like that. One of the things that I've noticed speaking to people that ended up in bad work environments or even toxic work environments is there was always that, there was something off in the job interview process. Now, if something is off, it doesn't mean that you need to immediately withdraw yourself. Again, loop it back into the questions that you're asking, the research that you do, and the due diligence that you do. Maybe you don't remove yourself as a candidate right away, but it gives you something to really dig into when you get to that job offer. And again, that's the topic of my next video. Make sure you're subscribed. Now, as a bonus, I wanted to talk about what to do if one of these red flags arises, especially if it's an extreme red flag. There is no way that you are going to pursue this opportunity after this. For example, the interviewer makes a lewd remark about you and what you're wearing. You're not going back because you don't want to work for that person, okay? Or they're making you really uncomfortable, or the entire vibe is just so off because they are so deluded about how important they are and how much you need this opportunity. There's something that you can do. And I'm telling you this because I wish in my super weird job interview that I knew you can dismiss yourself from a job interview at any point in time. And there is a way to do it that isn't going to damage your professional reputation or make you look really bad. For example, you don't want to tell the person that they're a jerk and storm out of the room. That, even though they're the ones being unprofessional, they're going to be the ones that are being loud about you walking out of the job interview because they have to rationalize their bad behavior, so they're going to make it a you problem. However, what you can do at the point that something happens that you're like, no, this is an obvious deal breaker for me. I am not comfortable proceeding with this opportunity. I know that is my decision. I know I will be emailing the recruiter immediately following the interview to tell them never to contact me again. There is something that you can say. You can simply say, as we're having a conversation, I don't feel like I'm the best candidate for you, and I don't want to waste any of your time. So I would like to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation and consider me, and I wish you the best of luck in filling the role. And you can end it right there, just like that. Now, hopefully you never need to do that, and hopefully these job interview red flags aren't popping up all over the place. But now you know what to do if they do, and you don't need to suffer through an inappropriate or super awkward job interview if there's enough of the red flags available. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What job interview red flags would you add to this list? Have you experienced any of these in a job interview that you've been to? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, if you're watching this because you are preparing for an interview, we need to make sure that you're gonna slay that interview. So go ahead and watch this video right now, and it has some super helpful tips. But before you go, if this helped you out, if it helped you see some red flags in a job interview, give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel, makes you my favorite career bestie. Win-win situation. As always, my friend, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.